There is a moment when your words cease to be mere sound, and they begin to carry divine power. That moment comes when faith rises within you, and your lips release what your heart believes. Every word spoken in faith becomes a living force, sharp, precise, and unstoppable. It cuts through fear, it pierces unbelief, and it destroys the roots of defeat. Your tongue was never meant to be idle. It was designed to create, to declare, to dominate circumstances. When faith takes hold of your speech, your words become a sword crafted not of metal, but of truth. The unseen responds to the voice of faith. Mountains do not move because of noise. They move because of authority that flows from words grounded in conviction. You see, faith has two parts: believing in your heart and speaking with your mouth. The heart is the engine, but the mouth is the release. Until your belief finds voice, it remains imprisoned within you. But when you speak, heaven recognizes your authority and hell trembles at your boldness. Every promise you speak is a strike against doubt. Every declaration of truth is a blade cutting through impossibility. When you say, I can, even in the face of you can't, something shifts. The atmosphere changes. The impossible begins to yield. Because faith never speaks what it sees, it speaks what it knows. It speaks what God has already established. But be warned, faith cannot share a tongue with fear. You cannot speak victory one moment and defeat the next. A double tongue cuts your own power in half. Consistency sharpens the sword. Keep your words steady. Keep them aligned with truth. Let your mouth become the voice of faith every day and every challenge. The moment you align your speech with divine promise, your words become more than talk. They become tools of triumph. Speak life when death surrounds you. Speak healing when sickness whispers. Speak abundance when lack stares you down, because when your word becomes a sword of faith, every wall before you must fall and every chain must break. So stand strong, hold the sword in your mouth, speak with conviction. For your victory begins not in your circumstances, but in your words. When a person truly understands that their words are not simply sounds formed by the tongue, but living expressions of inner belief, the very atmosphere around them begins to change. Words are the bridges between the unseen and the seen, the carriers of invisible forces that construct reality itself. When you speak, you are not merely communicating, you are creating, shaping, and setting into motion forces that respond to the conviction behind your voice. The power of spoken faith lies not in the eloquence of the phrase, but in the depth of belief that fuels it. When you speak with unwavering confidence, you release creative energy that aligns with spiritual law, and that law is absolute. What you continually speak with faith and persistence becomes your lived experience. Words spoken in faith act like seeds. They may not sprout instantly, but within them lies the blueprint of what will be manifested. The unseen realm begins to respond, rearranging circumstances, drawing resources, and opening doors that intellect alone could never access. This is why your words must always agree with the truth you believe. For every time your speech contradicts your faith, you weaken the structure of what you are building. Faith that is silent remains dormant, but faith that speaks becomes active, alive, and creative. When you open your mouth and declare what you know to be true, even before you see it, you engage the principle that turns belief into manifestation. This is not empty positive thinking. It is the conscious exercise of spiritual law. The same power that spoke the universe into being now rests within you, waiting to be released through your own words. When your language aligns with the unseen truth rather than the visible circumstance, you begin to experience the miraculous. Words spoken in fear attract defeat, but words spoken in faith draw victory. The tongue is not neutral. It is either constructing your future or dismantling it, either building faith or feeding doubt. Every time you speak faith-filled words, you are wielding a sword that cuts through confusion, limitation, and resistance. That sword is forged in the furnace of conviction. It becomes sharp when you consistently declare truth regardless of external evidence. The moment your mouth speaks in harmony with divine promise, your words become living instruments of power. They carry authority that transcends human reasoning because they are not rooted in uncertainty. They are anchored in eternal truth. Faith spoken with conviction has no need to beg or plead. It commands because it knows its authority, and this authority is not loudness or emotion. It is quiet, certain, immovable confidence that what has been declared will come to pass. Just as light cannot coexist with darkness, faith cannot share space with doubt, and the tongue becomes the battleground where one will always conquer the other. If you want your faith to grow strong, train your speech to follow truth, not feeling. Discipline your tongue to agree only with victory, not defeat. Each word you release is either building a path toward the fulfillment of your faith or erecting barriers of fear and disbelief. Guard your language as carefully as a warrior guards his sword, for dull, careless speech weakens the edge of faith. When you begin to speak words charged with spiritual conviction, every sentence becomes a strike against limitation. You stop reacting to circumstances and start commanding them. The physical world bends under the authority of spoken faith because it recognizes the voice of one who knows. When your word becomes a sword of faith, you are no longer the victim of life. You become its architect. You understand that every challenge is not a wall, but an opportunity for faith to demonstrate its power. And as your tongue releases truth again and again, that truth takes root in your reality, carving pathways through impossibility. Faith-filled speech is not arrogance, it is partnership with divine law. You are not trying to make something happen. You are aligning yourself with what already exists in the spiritual realm and calling it into the natural. That is the mystery and the majesty of faith. It speaks before it sees, it declares before it feels, and it knows before it touches. Your words, once infused with this awareness, become unstoppable. They carry healing, restoration, prosperity, and victory. They shatter the limitations set by fear and give form to unseen possibilities. When you understand that your speech holds this kind of power, you begin to treat every word as sacred, every sentence as an act of creation. You learn to speak with intention, not reaction. You begin to realize that the same voice that once complained can now command. The same mouth that once murmured defeat can now decree destiny. And when your word becomes a sword of faith, life itself responds, not because you are loud, but because you are aligned. Faith is not a vague feeling or an emotional high that fades with time. It is a living force that moves through the human spirit and expresses itself through the spoken word. When faith fills the heart, it seeks release through the mouth. Because what resides deeply within must eventually find expression without. Words are the carriers of belief. They give body to the invisible, shape to the unseen, and direction to the forces that govern life. When a person speaks with conviction born of faith, their words take on the very essence of creative energy. The universe, which was itself formed through words of divine command, recognizes and responds to this kind of speech. Every time faith is spoken, it sends out vibrations that begin to mold reality according to the pattern of that belief. Silence may conceal faith, but only spoken words can activate its power. The greatest truths of life demand a voice. They come alive only when declared. This is why every great transformation begins not with action, but with speech that carries the weight of assurance. You cannot manifest what you will not proclaim, for the spoken word is the channel through which faith travels from the spiritual realm into the physical one. Your speech is not empty sound. It is the breath of creation flowing through you, shaping your circumstances, relationships, health, and destiny. When you speak from the heart of faith, you are not simply describing reality, you are defining it. Every phrase of certainty becomes a tool that cuts through doubt, fear, and resistance. When you say, I believe, even in the face of impossibility, you are aligning your life with the very principles that govern miracles. The power is not in the volume or eloquence of your speech, but in the authenticity of your conviction. The spoken word backed by unwavering belief does not merely echo in the air, it reverberates through creation itself, commanding things to shift in accordance with divine law. The difference between ordinary words and words of faith is the power behind them. Ordinary words pass without effect, but words that rise from faith carry authority. They are not born of fear, emotion, or circumstance. They are born of knowledge of truth, of divine promise, of spiritual law. When your heart knows and your mouth agrees, creation listens. Every declaration made in faith is a strike against defeat. It tears down barriers, cuts through impossibility, and sets in motion the unseen mechanisms of victory. The spoken word of faith is like a sword that never dulls. It grows sharper with every use. But for that sword to remain strong, your speech must stay consistent. You cannot declare victory one day and speak defeat the next. For divided words divide results. Doubt weakens the edge of faith, while consistency strengthens it. The power of speech lies not only in its content, but in its continuity. What you say repeatedly with conviction becomes the rhythm of your reality. The more you declare truth, the more truth shapes your life. When you speak in alignment with the divine, your words carry creative force, and that force reshapes everything around you. You begin to see challenges not as obstacles, but as opportunities for faith to prove its strength. In the midst of darkness, your words become light. In the face of sickness, your words become healing. In the shadow of fear, your words become courage. That is the secret of power, to let your mouth become the instrument of faith. Speak what you believe, not what you feel. Speak what is eternal, not what is temporary. For every word released in faith is a step toward victory, and every declaration made in conviction is an act of creation. When your word becomes the sword of faith, no force of doubt, fear, or failure can prevail against you, because the universe itself is designed to obey the sound of faith-filled speech. The authority of faith-filled words is unlike any other power in the world, because it operates on a principle that is both spiritual and practical, invisible yet absolutely effective. Every time you speak with belief, you are exercising the authority given to you to shape circumstances, influence outcomes, and command the unseen to move on your behalf. Words spoken in faith are not empty. They are living instruments designed to enforce spiritual law and establish reality in alignment with divine truth. When you utter words of conviction, you are not negotiating with circumstances. You are issuing commands that creation is compelled to obey. This authority is not dependent on strength, resources, or human ability. It flows directly from the alignment of your spoken word with eternal principles. In life, many struggle because they fail to realize the enormous influence of their own voice. Their words are casual, reactive, and often inconsistent, and as a result, their faith remains powerless. The tongue, when disciplined and guided by conviction, becomes a weapon that can overcome adversity, dispel doubt, and release miracles. It is a sword that, once wielded correctly, can cut through every limitation that has held a person back. But the key lies in understanding understanding that the sword is effective only when it is sharp, focused, and used with intentionality. Words flung carelessly, spoken without understanding or belief, scatter energy rather than harness it. Faith that is not expressed vocally is a river dammed. It has potential, but it cannot flow. Once the tongue begins to speak in agreement with what the Spirit believes, a supernatural force is unleashed. This force has the power to heal, restore, and prosper. It has the authority to reverse situations, break chains, and open doors that seemed permanently closed. Those who learn to speak with this level of intentionality understand that their mouths are not merely communication tools, but instruments of transformation. They discover that declaring truth, even before seeing results, moves mountains, shifts atmospheres, and influences lives. The spoken word bridges the gap between intention and manifestation. Thoughts alone are inert until they find expression. Feelings alone cannot alter circumstances until they are verbalized with faith. Each syllable of a declaration becomes a catalyst for change, a spark that ignites the dormant power within both the human spirit and the spiritual realm. It is this principle that separates ordinary living from extraordinary results. The power of consistent declaration cannot be overstated. Words of faith must be repeated, reinforced, and held firmly, because it is through repeated verbal agreement with truth that faith is strengthened and circumstances are aligned. One cannot speak victory once and then allow fear, doubt, or negativity to dominate the next moment. Faith grows and authority is exercised through continual agreement with what is true, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. Each time you reaffirm what you believe, you sharpen the sword of your words and increase the force behind your declarations. The environment begins to respond, situations bend, and possibilities once blocked become accessible. Silence, hesitation, or wavering language weakens the impact, allowing obstacles to persist longer than necessary. But consistent, deliberate, and faithful speech establishes dominance over every challenge. The universe operates in response to law, and the law governing faith and words is clear. What is declared with authority and belief must manifest. Those who understand this principle never speak defeat because they recognize that to speak fear is to feed the very thing they do not want. Conversely, when words are consistently aligned with faith, they enforce what is desired, calling invisible forces into action and creating opportunities where none appeared. Faith-filled speech operates at a level beyond human comprehension, yet it produces tangible results. It changes relationships, improves health, restores finances, and opens doors that human effort alone cannot open. To understand the power of your tongue is to understand the key to living a life that is victorious in every area. It is not about arrogance or dominance, but about alignment with truth. You are not merely reacting to what happens around you. You are shaping, directing, and transforming reality through the words you consistently declare. This is why teaching, understanding, and applying the principles of faith-filled speech is crucial for anyone who desires a life of success, abundance, and influence. Those who master this principle discover a source of power within themselves that cannot be measured by natural means, but is evident in the results it produces in every area of life. When the tongue is trained to speak in harmony with faith, every declaration becomes an act of authority that transcends natural limitations. Circumstances that once seemed immovable begin to shift. Problems that appeared insurmountable begin to dissolve, and situations that were blocked for years start to open. The spoken word of faith carries with it a supernatural weight. It pierces through confusion, fear, and opposition. The key is understanding that it is not the strength of the voice that matters, nor the number of words spoken, but the agreement of the heart and mouth with divine truth. The Spirit believes and the tongue releases. The unseen responds and the visible changes. Each verbal declaration is a strike, cutting through impossibility and establishing victory. Those who have not exercised this power often fail because they underestimate the authority they have through their words. They live in a reactive state, responding to circumstances rather than shaping them. But once the power of consistent faith-filled speech is understood and applied, it changes the entire approach to life. Obstacles no longer intimidate, setbacks no longer discourage, and fear loses its grip. The believer begins to operate from a place of authority rather than reaction. The spoken word becomes a sword, precise and powerful, cutting through limitations and activating blessings that were previously dormant. Every day, in every situation, the believer has the opportunity to exercise this authority. The tongue becomes a tool for victory, a channel for miracles, and a weapon against every challenge that arises. This is the essence of living a life governed by faith: to speak with certainty, to declare with authority, and to release the power of the Spirit into the natural world. The words that are spoken in alignment with belief do not return void. They accomplish the purpose for which they are released. When mastered, this principle makes the believer unstoppable, demonstrating that life is not controlled by circumstances, but by the authority exercised through faith-filled speech. Faith becomes powerful not when it is contained quietly in the mind or heart, but when it is actively expressed through spoken words that carry certainty and authority. Words are not just instruments of communication. They are the vehicles through which unseen forces are moved and circumstances are transformed. When a person speaks with conviction, they release creative energy into the world that shapes events according to the alignment of that belief. The tongue, therefore, is not neutral. It is either working in harmony with faith to establish victory or in conflict with it to invite limitation. Every utterance is a declaration that either builds or destroys, advances or hinders. The principle at work is simple but profound. What is spoken in agreement with faith sets in motion spiritual dynamics that must produce results. It is the spoken word that acts as a bridge between the invisible promises of faith and their manifestation in the natural world. The human spirit can hold belief, but unless that belief is vocalized, it remains inactive. Faith must be released, and speech is the mechanism for that release. When the heart believes and the tongue confesses, the unseen realm responds, shifting circumstances, opening doors, and creating solutions that the mind alone cannot engineer. Words spoken in doubt or fear weaken the power of faith, while words spoken in unwavering trust become precise instruments of divine operation. The spoken word becomes a sword cutting through adversity, doubt, and impossibility and establishing a path for victory. Each declaration of truth spoken with authority begins to dismantle obstacles that have stood unchallenged, reshaping life in accordance with the principles of faith. This is not simply wishful thinking or positive affirmation. It is the conscious application of spiritual law through disciplined, purposeful, and consistent speech. When faith is spoken aloud, it activates forces that are otherwise dormant. There is an inherent energy in words that originates from the Spirit, and when coupled with belief, that energy gains authority. Words are dynamic. They carry weight and intention. A faith-filled declaration impacts circumstances differently than a passive thought because it is the difference between potential and action. A seed may contain life, but until it is planted, watered, and exposed to the right conditions, it cannot grow. Similarly, faith in the heart contains power, but until it is expressed verbally, it remains inert. The act of speaking brings the principle of faith into motion, releasing it into the environment and compelling the natural and spiritual realms to respond. Spoken words aligned with belief enforce authority over situations, commanding results that the intellect cannot achieve alone. It is this alignment between inner conviction and outer expression that transforms ordinary speech into a weapon capable of influencing reality. The spoken word, when backed by faith, has a consistency and precision that reshapes outcomes. It does not beg, it does not plead, it commands. And the universe designed to respond to law obeys the authority embedded in that speech. Therefore, learning to govern the tongue to ensure that every word aligns with faith is essential for anyone who desires to live a life of victory and influence. Indiscriminate speech, wavering declarations, or words born of fear dilute the power of faith, while consistent, confident, and truth-based speech magnifies it. Each time faith is spoken, the unseen gears of life begin to move, reshaping circumstances and producing results that surpass human expectation. Understanding this principle is key to unlocking the full potential of the believer, as it teaches that life can be directed not by reaction to challenges, but by the authority exercised through the tongue. Consistency in speech is the cornerstone of effective faith. Sporadic declarations produce sporadic results, because the spiritual dynamics activated by words require persistence and alignment over time. To wield the sword of faith effectively, one must speak truth consistently, refusing to allow doubt, fear, or negative circumstances to dilute the power of verbal declarations. Words spoken intermittently or with hesitation do not have the same force. They lack the precision and intensity required to shape reality. The strength of faith-filled speech lies in repetition, in the continual agreement of the tongue with what the heart believes, regardless of present conditions. Every time a declaration of faith is made, it reinforces the structure of reality according to the principles of truth. Repetition huns the edge of sword, sharpens its impact, and ensures that circumstances yield to the authority of belief. In contrast, inconsistency weakens the effectiveness of words, allowing challenges to persist and opportunities to remain inaccessible. Faith is like a stream of energy. It must flow steadily, and speech is the channel through which that stream moves. When spoken persistently and aligned with truth, words of faith command the environment, influence outcomes, and produce results that would otherwise be impossible. This is why mastering the discipline of the tongue is critical. It is not enough to think rightly or to feel faith. That faith must be continually spoken to establish dominion over life. The power of words, when combined with faith, is transformative. They cut through limitations, dismantle obstacles, and release solutions that the intellect cannot fabricate. They establish patterns of victory that ripple across every area of life, demonstrating that speech is more than communication. It is the instrument through which faith operates in the natural world. The impact of faith-filled speech extends beyond the individual to the environment and circumstances surrounding them. Words of faith have a creative force that does not merely reflect intention, but enforces it, reshaping outcomes and realigning situations with divine principles. Every spoken declaration becomes a command that the spiritual and natural laws are compelled to follow. When spoken consistently, these words build a reality that mirrors the conviction of the speaker, turning obstacles into opportunities, limitations into breakthroughs, and impossibilities into tangible results. The tongue becomes a sword precisely because it executes authority in alignment with belief. Obstacles that once seemed immovable begin to crumble. Problems that appeared permanent begin to dissolve. and situations that were stagnant begin to flow. This happens not through effort alone, but through the combined force of belief and consistent verbal expression. A faith-filled word does not rely on circumstances. It dictates circumstances, compelling them to conform to truth. The discipline of the tongue, the awareness of the authority in speech, and the intentionality behind every word become essential practices for anyone seeking to exercise this power. Words spoken in faith cut through confusion, defeat, and fear, releasing clarity, victory, and assurance. They transform environments, influence relationships, and produce results in the physical world through consistent, deliberate, and truth-aligned speech. The believer activates a force that brings the promises of faith into tangible existence. When mastered, this principle shows that life is not controlled solely by external events, but by the words spoken with authority and conviction, revealing the profound impact of the tongue as a sword of faith. The spoken word of faith carries a dimension of power that transcends ordinary understanding because it operates on principles that govern both the natural and spiritual realms. Words are not merely a reflection of thought. They are an expression of authority and intention, and when spoken in alignment with belief, they become instruments that shape reality. Every declaration made from a place of conviction engages forces that respond to the authority of faith. The moment the tongue speaks with certainty, it begins to enforce what has been believed in the heart, bringing unseen realities into visible manifestation. This is why it is said that life is shaped as much by what is spoken as by what is done. Actions follow words, circumstances bend to them, and opportunities arise in response to them. The power of the spoken word lies not in volume or eloquence, but in the certainty and consistency of belief behind it. Words expressed in fear, doubt, or contradiction undermine the very foundation of faith, while words spoken with unwavering conviction become sharp instruments capable of cutting through impossibility and limitation. They pierce confusion, break through obstacles, and establish pathways where there were none. Every word carries energy. When faith directs that energy, it transforms potential into reality. Silence, hesitation, or vacillation prevents the release of this power. To release faith, it must be spoken, and to be effective, it must be declared boldly, consistently, and with full assurance that what is spoken aligns with divine principles. The tongue becomes a sword that enforces spiritual law, a tool that converts belief into results, and a channel through which the unseen forces of the universe are activated on one's behalf. The principle of authority in speech rests upon the understanding that words have the capacity to enforce outcomes independently of human reasoning or ability. When faith is spoken with clarity and conviction, it does not negotiate with circumstance. It commands results according to the laws governing life. The spoken word carries the energy to align the natural and spiritual realms with the intention of the speaker, turning thoughts into actions, promises into realities, and visions into tangible experiences. This is why mastery of the tongue is essential for anyone seeking to live a life marked by consistent victory. Words spoken carelessly, without awareness of their spiritual significance, dissipate potential, delay results, and allow obstacles to persist. But words spoken with authority, words that are rooted in faith, operate as instruments of creation. They establish patterns of life that are difficult to alter, forge pathways through difficulty, and set into motion mechanisms of provision, protection, and breakthrough. The energy behind faith-filled speech is cumulative. Every declaration, every affirmation, and every verbal confirmation of truth adds weight to the spoken command, strengthening its influence over circumstances. Inconsistent speech weakens faith and allows opposing forces to maintain their hold. Consistent, deliberate, and confident words, however, sharpen the sword of faith, making it an unyielding tool capable of penetrating barriers and enforcing victory in every area of life. The transformative power of spoken faith is amplified when words are repeated and reinforced over time. Faith established not by a single utterance, but through persistent verbal agreement with truth. Repetition imbues the spoken word with energy, sharpens its impact, and ensures that circumstances yield to the authority being exercised. When declarations are consistent, they establish a rhythm in the spiritual and natural realms that cannot be ignored. Obstacles that initially resist begin to give way, resistance diminishes, and solutions emerge as a natural consequence of alignment with divine principles. Words of faith, when spoken regularly and with conviction, create momentum that builds over time, producing results that are often unexpected in their speed and effectiveness. The tongue, disciplined in this way, becomes a tool for victory rather than a source of defeat. The contrast between sporadic, uncertain speech and consistent, authoritative declaration illustrates why many experience delay or stagnation in their lives. It is not circumstance that determines the pace of fulfillment, but the consistent release of faith through the spoken word. Repetition does not make speech mechanical. It reinforces certainty, strengthens authority, and ensures that the unseen responds as it must. Persistent verbal expression aligns the believer with the principles of creation, allowing faith to manifest effectively and powerfully in every domain of life. The alignment of speech with belief is central to the efficacy of faith-filled words. Words that contradict what the heart believes or that vacillate between doubt and conviction weaken the sword of faith and diminish its power to produce results. Faith must be expressed consistently, with the same intensity and certainty regardless of external circumstances. The spoken word is not influenced by the appearance of difficulty, but by the unwavering confidence in the promise being declared. This discipline trains the tongue to operate as a precise instrument capable of cutting through obstacles and activating solutions that may have seemed inaccessible. When words consistently agree with belief, they do more than influence outcomes. They establish authority over them. The believer moves from a reactive posture to a proactive one, commanding situations into alignment with truth rather than being swayed by circumstance. Every spoken declaration becomes a strike of authority, each one reinforcing the other, creating a cumulative force that reshapes life according to the principles of faith. Words of doubt or hesitation disrupt this force, but words of confidence spoken with authority compound and gain momentum. Mastery of this principle ensures that the tongue becomes a reliable instrument of victory and that the spoken word operates as a sword capable of enforcing faith in tangible, measurable ways. Finally, the true power of the spoken word is revealed in its ability to transform not only circumstances, but also the character and confidence of the one who speaks it. Faith-filled declarations strengthen belief, reinforce authority, and cultivate a mindset of victory that permeates every aspect of life. The act of speaking with conviction trains the spirit to trust in unseen forces, builds resilience against doubt, and establishes a foundation for consistent success. When the tongue is used to release words of faith, it not only enforces results in the external world, but also solidifies the internal conviction of the speaker. Each declaration becomes a reinforcement of the truth that life responds to authority and belief, instilling courage, determination, and a sense of purpose. Over time, the habitual use of faith-filled speech transforms the believer into someone who does not merely hope for victory, but expects it. Circumstances, challenges, and opposition no longer hold the power to intimidate because the voice has been trained to declare truth consistently. The tongue becomes a sword of precision, able to cut through every obstacle and establish conditions favorable for the manifestation of promises. The believer learns that life is not passively endured, but actively shaped by the words spoken with authority and belief. Through disciplined, consistent, and faith-aligned speech, the unseen is activated, the impossible becomes achievable, and the natural world begins to conform to the intentions of faith. This principle underscores the profound truth that the spoken word is not a mere expression of thought, but the sword by which victory, provision, healing, and transformation are enforced in life. The spoken word of faith functions as a dynamic force that can influence outcomes far beyond what the natural senses perceive. Every time a person declares what they believe with conviction, they engage in energy that has been designed to respond to certainty and authority. Words, when aligned with faith, are not merely sounds, they are instruments of creation, capable of shaping circumstances, directing events, and producing results that would otherwise seem impossible. This is why careful attention must be given to the way one speaks, because the tongue is either a source of victory or a cause of limitation. Words spoken in agreement with doubt, fear, or negativity diminish the effect of faith, while words spoken with certainty, confidence, and unwavering belief amplify it. The human spirit may conceive possibilities, but it is the spoken word that activates them, bridging the gap between intention and manifestation. Each statement made in faith carries a vibrational force that begins to work in the unseen realm, setting into motion responses that align with the declaration. When someone speaks boldly, confidently, and consistently, they are not merely expressing desire, they are issuing commands to the spiritual and natural order, calling forth outcomes that reflect the truth of their words. Faith unspoken remains inactive, yet spoken faith becomes tangible, real, and operative, cutting through impossibility like a sword through resistance. The power lies in the combination of belief and articulation. The heart conceives, but the tongue releases, and the spoken word ensures that intention is translated into effect. Consistency in speech is essential to harness the full power of faith. One cannot declare victory or make a statement of authority sporadically and expect it to shape reality in a lasting way. Faith builds strength through repetition, reinforcement, and unwavering alignment between heart belief and verbal expression. Each time a statement is repeated with conviction, the spoken word accumulates weight and authority, magnifying its influence over circumstances. Inconsistent or wavering speech diminishes impact and allows obstacles to persist longer than necessary because spiritual law responds to the power of agreement, not casual intention. Repetition is not mere habit. It is a method of refining, sharpening, and strengthening the sword of the tongue. Just as a blade must be repeatedly honed to maintain its edge, the words of faith must be continually expressed to maintain their authority and effectiveness. Over time, persistent, consistent declarations create momentum in both the spiritual and natural realms, producing tangible outcomes that are aligned with the believer's intentions. This principle explains why those who habitually speak truth in alignment with belief experience faster, more consistent results, whereas those who allow their words to fluctuate between faith and fear often struggle to see progress. Consistency solidifies the effect of speech, establishing patterns that direct circumstances, shape outcomes, and enforce authority over situations that once seemed immovable. In essence, repeated, deliberate, and confident speech trains the universe to respond in accordance with the believer's expectation. Turning words into instruments of tangible transformation, the alignment of words with conviction is a critical factor in activating the power of faith. When the tongue speaks messages that contradict inner belief or vacillate between doubt and certainty, it diminishes the impact of faith and disrupts the manifestation of results. True authority in speech is maintained when the mouth consistently agrees with what the heart knows to be true, regardless of what the eyes see or the environment suggests. Words that are consistent with faith enforce spiritual law, establish dominion over circumstances, and create a predictable pattern of victory. In contrast, words of fear, uncertainty, or contradiction introduce chaos, reduce effectiveness, and leave challenges unresolved. The discipline of speaking in agreement with belief transforms ordinary speech into a weapon of power, a sword that can pierce limitations, cut through difficulty, and produce outcomes that align with divine principles. Every declaration of faith acts as a strike against impossibility, reinforcing the strength of previous statements and increasing the likelihood of tangible results. The believer who masters the tongue understands that life is not governed solely by what is visible, but by the authority exercised through consistent, faith-filled words. This disciplined approach to speech trains the mind, fortifies the spirit, and ensures that the spoken word is always a reflection of inner certainty, magnifying its power to influence circumstances and enforce victory. The spoken word of faith is transformative not only to the external environment, but also to the inner character and resilience of the speaker. Each declaration made with conviction strengthens belief, instills confidence, and builds a mindset oriented toward triumph. By practicing consistent, faith-aligned speech, the individual trains their spirit to trust unseen realities, rely on spiritual law, and operate with expectation rather than fear. This internal reinforcement is as significant as the external effects because it creates a posture of authority and decisiveness in the face of challenges. A person who regularly speaks with faith develops courage, clarity, and determination, knowing that their words carry creative force. Each affirmation reinforces the certainty that circumstances must respond to the authority of spoken belief. Over time, this practice transforms the individual from one who is reactive to life into one who is proactive, shaping events, influencing outcomes, and commanding results through speech. The tongue becomes a powerful instrument, a sword capable of enforcing faith, dismantling obstacles, and producing tangible outcomes. The act of speaking faith strengthens the individual while simultaneously directing reality, creating a feedback loop where belief, expression, and manifestation continually reinforce one another. Mastery of this principle ensures that the believer is consistently empowered to face challenges, overcome limitations, and experience victories in every area of life. Words of faith, when properly employed, have the capacity to influence not only immediate circumstances, but also the long-term trajectory of life. Each declaration plants a seed in the spiritual realm that produces fruit in the natural world. The cumulative effect of consistent, aligned, and authoritative speech produces results that often exceed expectation, opening doors, solving problems, and creating opportunities that human effort alone cannot achieve. Every spoken word is a tool, a weapon, and a key capable of unlocking potential, cutting through impossibility, and establishing a framework for success. Those who understand the significance of this principle approach speech with intentionality, carefully choosing declarations that align with truth, reject fear, and enforce authority. Faith-filled speech is transformative because it operates on law. It produces effects in harmony with the nature of reality and spiritual principles. The tongue becomes the mechanism through which unseen forces are activated, making the believer a co-creator in the shaping of their destiny. By consistently speaking with authority, clarity, and confidence, the believer ensures that their words carry maximum impact, producing results in health, relationships, finances, and every other sphere of life. The repeated use of faith-aligned speech establishes a foundation upon which victories can be built and maintained over time. Ultimately, the true mastery of the tongue comes from understanding the inherent authority in words, the responsibility that accompanies speech, and the consistency required to make the sword of faith operative. Speaking faith is not a casual act. It is a deliberate exercise of spiritual power designed to produce tangible results. Words that are consistent, aligned with belief, and expressed with authority create patterns of victory that are reinforced over time, producing outcomes that reflect the speaker's expectation. Faith-filled speech cuts through limitation, pierces impossibility, and establishes dominion over circumstances. The discipline of the tongue ensures that every word spoken is intentional, precise, and effective, maximizing the power of faith in action. By mastering this principle, the believer becomes capable of shaping reality, influencing outcomes, and enforcing results that are consistent with the promises of faith. The spoken word becomes a sword not only because it is powerful, but because it is a disciplined, intentional, and authoritative instrument capable of transforming life, circumstances, and destiny itself. When consistently applied, this principle demonstrates that the tongue is one of the most potent tools available to the believer, a sword of faith through which victory is declared, established, and enforced in every domain of life. The ultimate power of faith is realized not merely in the possession of belief, but in the consistent, deliberate expression of that belief through words spoken with authority and conviction. The tongue serves as the primary instrument through which faith moves from the invisible to the visible, from potential to manifestation. Every word uttered carries weight. Every declaration of truth, when aligned with the heart's belief, acts as a force that commands reality to conform to the principles of faith. When faith is spoken consistently and with precision, it becomes a sword capable of cutting through resistance, breaking down barriers, and creating opportunities where none seemed possible. The spoken word does not simply accompany faith, it activates it. Faith confined to the mind remains dormant, but faith expressed through the tongue comes alive and enforces its authority. The consistency of this expression is vital, because sporadic or hesitant speech weakens the power of the word. Every repetition of a faith-filled declaration sharpens the edge of the sword, increasing its capacity to pierce through doubt, fear, and impossibility. This dynamic demonstrates that the tongue is far more than a tool for communication. It is a weapon, a channel for supernatural influence, and the mechanism through which victory is established in life. Each statement of belief is like a strike of a sword against limitation, compelling the environment, circumstances, and even unseen forces to respond in alignment with truth. The spoken word embodies authority because it carries intention, belief, and expectation, and when these elements converge consistently, they produce tangible results. The consistency of faith-filled speech reinforces the authority of the believer over all aspects of life. To wield the sword effectively, one must speak without wavering, declaring truth regardless of appearances, circumstances, or opposition. Words that are consistent and aligned with belief build spiritual momentum, creating a rhythm in both the natural and spiritual realms that produces results. Sporadic declarations fail to generate this momentum, leaving the believer vulnerable to the fluctuations of external events. Persistence in verbal agreement with faith ensures that spoken words maintain their influence, enforce authority, and reshape reality according to the principles being declared. This repetition is not rote or mechanical, but intentional and powerful, reinforcing the believer's connection to the truth behind the declaration. It is through this disciplined exercise that the tongue becomes an instrument of precision and force. Each time faith is expressed verbally, the sword of the spoken word is honed, increasing its effectiveness and enabling it to cut through even the most entrenched obstacles. Over time, consistent speech aligns circumstances with expectation, producing measurable outcomes and establishing patterns of victory that cannot easily be reversed. The cumulative effect of persistent declarations demonstrates that words, when used with discipline and faith, are powerful tools capable of shaping the course of life itself. The alignment of speech with inner conviction is the foundation of the effectiveness of faith-filled words. Words that are not in agreement with belief or that vacillate between doubt and assurance weaken the power of the tongue. Authority in speech is maintained when the mouth consistently expresses what the heart knows to be true, without hesitation or contradiction. This alignment transforms ordinary speech into a sword that penetrates challenges, displaces limitations, and enforces results in accordance with spiritual principle. Each verbal declaration reinforces the other, building cumulative strength that magnifies the impact of subsequent statements. In contrast, inconsistent, fear-based, or doubtful speech dissipates energy, delays results, and allows obstacles to persist. Mastery of the tongue ensures that every word spoken is purposeful, accurate, and aligned with truth, allowing faith to operate effectively in the natural realm. When words consistently mirror belief, the speaker moves from a reactive posture to a proactive one, commanding outcomes and creating circumstances rather than being influenced by them. The disciplined use of the tongue ensures that the sword of faith remains sharp, precise, and effective, capable of enforcing victory over every area of life. Faith-filled speech not only transforms external circumstances, but also strengthens the internal disposition of the speaker. The act of speaking with authority and conviction reinforces belief, builds confidence, and cultivates a mindset that expects triumph regardless of opposition. Each declaration strengthens the spirit, fortifies the will, and creates an inner sense of assurance that aligns the individual with principles of success and victory. Over time, this practice trains the believer to rely less on human reasoning, circumstances, or external validation, and more on the authority inherent in the words they speak. The tongue becomes a tool for both external transformation and internal development, shaping character, resilience, and determination. By habitually expressing faith through speech, the individual internalizes the principle that life responds to the authority of words, creating a consistent pattern of proactive engagement with challenges. This dual effect on both the inner and outer dimensions of life demonstrates why disciplined, faith-filled speech is indispensable for achieving lasting results and personal empowerment. The cumulative effect of persistent, faith-filled speech produces outcomes that surpass ordinary expectation. Every declaration plants a spiritual seed that grows into tangible results in the natural realm. These words act as instruments of creation, producing solutions, opening doors, and establishing circumstances that reflect the authority of the speaker's belief. The tongue, trained to speak with precision and conviction, becomes a weapon of transformation, cutting through opposition, dismantling obstacles, and producing opportunities that human effort alone cannot secure. This principle highlights the strategic importance of verbal discipline. Every statement, every declaration, and every affirmation carries weight and must be aligned with truth to maximize its effect. Faith-filled speech operates in accordance with law, producing predictable and measurable outcomes. The repeated, intentional use of words of authority ensures that the believer is not at the mercy of circumstance, but is actively shaping reality, enforcing victory, and manifesting promises. The spoken word, when used consistently and with authority, establishes a pattern of influence that permeates all areas of life. By continually declaring truth, the believer exercises dominion over circumstances, relationships, finances, health, and every other aspect of existence. Words become tools for governance, instruments of direction, and channels of supernatural power. The discipline of the tongue enables the believer to maintain control over the flow of events, ensuring that spoken declarations align with desired outcomes. This consistent practice cultivates a posture of authority, confidence, and expectation, reinforcing the believer's ability to command results and shape life through speech. Faith-filled speech is not dependent on external conditions. It operates independently of appearances because it derives authority from alignment with truth and the principles of creation. Ultimately, the mastery of spoken faith transforms both the believer and their circumstances. Words spoken in alignment with belief create authority, enforce spiritual law, and produce results that reflect the consistency, intention, and conviction behind them. The tongue becomes a sword, a precise, powerful, and intentional instrument capable of cutting through limitation, piercing impossibility, and establishing victory in every sphere of life. By cultivating consistency, alignment with belief, and discipline in speech, the believer ensures that every word carries authority, influence, and creative power. Life is not passively endured, but actively shaped through the intentional exercise of spoken faith. The consistent, deliberate use of the tongue demonstrates that words are not merely expressions of thought, but powerful instruments of transformation, establishing authority, enforcing results, and shaping destiny according to the principles of faith. The believer who masters this principle wields the sword of faith effectively, achieving victory over circumstances, producing measurable outcomes, and manifesting the promises of life with authority and precision.